Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista, and today I'd like to share with you a vintage inspired card. I'm starting off today with Simon Says Stamp floral card front, as well as Simon Says Stamp basic rectangle die sets. And to start, I want to find a rectangle that's as close to the size of the floral card front as I can. And as it turns out, there isn't one that matches exactly. So what I'm going to have to do is I'll use the largest 5.5 by 4.25 rectangle. And before I attach the card front to that panel, I'll just trim it down. I'll start off today with the 5.5 by 4.25 inch rectangle, and I'm using some Strathmore cold pressed watercolor paper today. And I'll just go ahead and run that through the die cut machine. I'll be using some Salvage Patina and Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink. And to start off, I'm going to choose Peacock Feathers. I'm just going to go ahead and press that ink pad right onto the glass mat and add some water using a spray bottle. I'll then take the smooth side of the watercolor paper and press it into that water and Distress Oxide ink mixture, moving that paper around, pressing it down and lifting it up, and moving it around again just to get that paper covered with ink. Once I feel like I have a sufficient amount of ink on that watercolor paper, I'll go in with my heat tool and dry that thoroughly. And once that's dry, I'll go ahead and repeat that process a couple times until I'm happy with the amount of Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink. As I mentioned, I'm alternating how much I dip and how much I drag the paper through that ink each time just to get a little depth in the card front. I'll come in next with some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink, and I pressed the watercolor paper directly into the ink first. I also like to vary how much water I use in each time I dip and drag that paper through that Distress Oxide ink. I'll then come in with a bit of water and press that down to pick up some more ink before drying it with the heat tool. And again, with the Salvage Patina, I'll just go ahead and repeat that process until I'm happy with the card front. And the wetter that this watercolor paper gets, the more that it wants to curl when it dries. That's okay. Off camera, I'm going to go ahead and run that through the laminator. I have a mini Minc. I like to warm it up to setting 1 before running my watercolor paper through my laminator. I'll move on next to the floral card front, and I'm just using a pencil to mark the rough outline of how big this card front is, just to serve as a guide. And since this piece of cardstock, this is 110-pound white cardstock, is a full sheet, I want to cut that down just so that I have less to work with as I move forward. I'll come in with some Mod Podge. I'm using Gloss Luster today. Any type of Mod Podge would work, and I have a paintbrush. It's a flatter paintbrush. I'm making sure to place that Mod Podge where the filigree outline of the flowers and the butterfly is on the die. As that Mod Podge is added to the cardstock, I'm making sure that my paintbrush isn't fully saturated. I want this Mod Podge to be uneven because I want the gold flakes to be uneven as well to give it that distressed look. And once I'm happy with that coverage, I'll come in with these gold flakes. I picked these up at a craft store, and I can't tell you how much they cost because I've had them in my stash for a few years. And using a small stiff paintbrush, I'll come in and rub those gold flakes across that Mod Podge. The instructions did say to place the gold flake down with tweezers. You could do that as well. And for other projects, there are specific adhesives and sealants to use for projects with this gold leaf. But for cards, I found that just a Mod Podge works fine. And as I add this Mod Podge and gold leaf, I'm making sure to add the Mod Podge and gold leaf to where the die is going to cut out. And I had to work fairly quickly. This Mod Podge did dry rather quickly. Before I set this aside to dry, I want to make sure that I'm happy with the gold leaf. I'll go ahead and just place that die over this cardstock just to see if I need any more coverage. Once I'm happy with the coverage, I'm going to set this aside to dry and take these paintbrushes upstairs to wash them with warm and soapy water. As that gold covered cardstock dries, I'm going to create my sentiment. And today I'm using Wonderful Script Sentiments from Spellbinders. And I chose Hello, and I'll be die cutting that today out of this pastel gold metallic cardstock. I just picked this up at my local craft store. It's by Recollections. Now that that Mod Podge has dried, I want to remove the excess gold leaf from that cardstock. And to do that, I'll use a 2-inch paintbrush. This is a paintbrush that I picked up at my hardware store. And moving that paintbrush across the gold leaf and in circles, it kind of brushes the excess off, creating a smooth finish. This paintbrush is stiffer than the paintbrushes I used to apply the product, but as far as paintbrushes from the hardware store go, it is still fairly soft bristled. I'll then bring in that inked watercolor paper and the paintbrush that I used to apply the glue to the white cardstock. And making sure that this paintbrush is fairly dry, I'm using Mod Podge again, but I'm making sure that the bristles aren't really saturated because I want to add just a small hint of gold leaf to this inked background, and I'm using the excess from the white cardstock. And I'm only adding enough gold to tie the two pieces of cardstock together. I'll then come in with that floral card front cover die. This time I'm going to die cut the gold colored cardstock. I'll just tape that down and run that through the die cut machine. Once this cardstock comes out of the die cut machine, I want to make sure to save all the little pieces that are cut out from this cardstock because I can save those and add them to another card in the future. Coming in with some liquid adhesive, I'm using Tombow liquid adhesive today. I want to make sure that that entire die cut on the back is covered with adhesive, making sure to get the entire rectangle as well as the pattern inside so it's not lifting up off of the watercolor paper once I adhere the two together. And when I place this floral card die cut on top of the watercolor paper, I want to make sure that two of the edges line up nicely because I'm going to trim this down so that they're the same size. And just using a paper trimmer, I'll trim those down. And using some liquid adhesive, I'll adhere the sentiment that I die cut earlier. And to bring this card front up to an A2 card size, I'll use two rectangles from the Simon Says Stamp Basic Rectangle die set. The largest rectangle is 5.5 by 4.25 inches, and the inner rectangle is just a smaller rectangle that I chose from the set. And using some liquid adhesive, I'll adhere the mat to the card front. And I decided to add some embellishments to this card. And today I chose a confetti from This Calls for Confetti. This is their white diamond and pearl mix. Using that Tombow liquid adhesive, I'll adhere those embellishments to the card front. I like to find the placement of my embellishments before I add adhesive. The last thing to do is to turn this card front into a card by adding it to a A2 card base. This is made from 110-pound white cardstock. I chose to use some liquid adhesive here as well, but you could also use a tape runner if you prefer. And that completes today's vintage inspired card. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.